given the fact that this guy's just a microphone, he's got no like gray matter up here. Right?
He's a big dummy.
Yeah, he's a big dummy, right? You know, I'm sure everyone's been in a place where it's noisy, a noisy environment. And let's say you're wearing headphones, you're trying to listen to music, or you're trying to talk to somebody or communicate with somebody. And you got to talk loud enough to get above the noise, right? Otherwise, and it's very difficult too. Like there's no nuance when there's noise. Like if you miss some words people are saying when it's loud. So, you think about it, how noise affects listening to music. It's difficult to do in a noisy environment.
Well, you usually just have to listen at really loud levels then, which is not good.
Yeah, you always had the example of like turning the volume up on the TV because someone's talking in the background. It's like that with headphones, of course. And there's a lot to talk about here because I think it's easy when you're used to loud environments to not really understand how it affects you and how much it changes the way you perceive the music and the sound and your enjoyment and things like that.
Well, yeah, right. For example, right, let's take this dummy head, which happens to have ears with microphones in it, right? So he's listening to a pair of Dianas, right?
Well, they're not plugged in.
Okay. Well,
they're wireless.
This is theoretical.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're wireless, yeah. There's batteries in there. She's listening.
Don't ask for that yet.
Well, the head's not plugged in either. So.
Okay. Yeah, he's listening. The head's listening.
Hypothetical listening.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you've got sound leaving these speakers right in the ear, right? So now we've got noise going on. So I'm clapping, I'm making noise. The noise is going through the headphone, and it's adding to the sound that the headphone's producing. So now you got multiple sounds. And given the fact that this guy's just a microphone, he's got no like gray matter up here. Right?
He's a big dummy.
Yeah, he's a big dummy, right? All he can do, he can't decipher between the noise. It's all going in and it's being put out there. The microphone's picking it up. Noise, audio, you name it, it's in there. What humans have going for them is they do have a brain that can decipher, right, and separate the noise from the music.
To some extent, absolutely.
But herein lies the problem. It's still a distraction.
Right.
Noise is still a distraction because it's not what you're ultimately after. You're trying to listen to the music, and yet here we have environmental noise. It'd be kind of cool. We did a video not that long ago I did a video on distortion measurements with the dummy head here with the B&K, and we showed that distortion increased. The distortion measurement increased with the ambient noise level around you. Mm-hmm. And some people were a little confused on that one because they thought the headphone was doing the distortion.
That's a complicated one. And I get it, right? So the first thing you need to understand is this is a simple apparatus. All it knows is it's a basic microphone that's measuring what's going into it, right? The expectation is that you can control the stimulus, the signal that goes into the headphone very precisely. So the software puts the signal to the headphone and it says, I know exactly the signal that's going to that headphone. Let's hear what comes out. And it sort of just calculates the difference and say, okay, how close was it, basically? And all that means is if you put noise in outside, it assumes that the headphone's doing it because it doesn't know where it's coming from. It can't be like, oh, that's out. It has no idea.
It can't separate the noise from the test signal.
So it just says anything that's happening outside, any noise of any kind, which even in a quiet room, there's noise, it assumes that's an error. That's distortion.
And it's just like you listening to music. It's a distraction when you're listening to music.
Same
but
thing.
In this case, it can't separate the noise from the test signal. All
complexity
it knows
here
is there's something there that's not supposed to be there.
When you listen to your headphones, there's noise outside me. When it listens, it doesn't. Yeah. It just shows you a number. It shows you a graph or whatever. And then you look at this data. And from this data, you don't know how much of it is noise. You honestly have no idea. There's no way to know.
Nope.
That's the trouble. You could estimate, but you need to know how noisy it was and what frequencies, how wideband this noise was. That's the trouble. So there's a lot of nuance there. People were saying that, so does that mean when I'm in a noisy environment, I'm hearing distortion? And I understand why people would think that, right?
Well, this dummy is.
Right.
Because it can't differentiate.
What you're hearing is the outside noise and the music. So if all you're comparing is the music compared to what you're supposed to hear, the absolute music, then yes, the outside noise is distortion in that sense, I guess.
And the opposite would be
true. The headphone isn't making it. It's coming in, right?
Well, there's the confusion. Yeah, it's like, oh, so basically saying, so when I wear my headphones outside, they're more distorted. It's like, well, no, they don't do anything differently wherever you are with the headphone. Or,
But that is why some people, I get the confusion, but that's why you want to have the measurements in the quietest place, because then you want to isolate just the headphone, right? You don't want to add anything. That could be a question mark.
There's two approaches to this, and they both have their merits, but they haven't been thoroughly explained, it seems. Generally, if you're testing a headphone, I think what you should be testing is just the headphone. You shouldn't be testing your test gear, your environment, your room, whatever, right? You should be testing the headphone, because if the end result is just a number, just data that you look at, you're going to infer that this is the headphone under test. However, if you listen to music in a noisy environment, then the attenuation performance of the headphone matters. So you could argue that's saying like, well, if a headphone attenuates better and I'm classically in a noisy environment, that it's better if I hear less around me. And maybe, but that should be ideally a separate measurement, because otherwise just looking at a frequency response or just a distortion, you have no idea how much attenuation you have, how much noise canceling you have. You don't know. That's a separate measurement, and you could publish that too. Some people do. It's much less common, but the foundation should always be you should strive to be in a quiet environment when you're testing the headphone. Two major reasons for that. You could only have the headphone playing so loud, because normally when you're in a normal environment, maybe you crank it up when you're in a loud environment, and you don't really notice the low level stuff as much, right? It kind of just, the range you hear kind of gets shifted up, and the quieter stuff, the noise or whatever, kind of gets more drowned out because your brain kind of ignores it easier.
Well, the noise masks low-level detail. So, you're not gonna. That's why you're not enjoying the music as much when it's
gone.
noisy. Yeah, you're just It's the noise takes over, and so really it's probably more difficult to concentrate on the music because you're trying to filter your brain's.
Right. Your brain's doing a lot
trying
of
to
work.
think away the noise.
Yeah, but if you crank up the volume, it kind of works.
Yeah.
However, as the volume goes up, almost every device, the distortion, the performance tends to go down. When the distortion goes up, the performance tends to go down, right? Usually it puts the device under more strain, and at some point, usually things get a little bit worse. So when you start to the point where you're listening at unreasonably loud volumes, if you were doing this in a critical environment with a headphone under test, that wouldn't necessarily be a representative environment, because most people aren't going to be listening to it at 120 dB or some deafening level. Maybe in certain environments you would, if if you work at a gun range or a grinder factory or something, then that's what you would be doing. But you probably wouldn't notice these issues quite as much as this would, because it's just so incredibly sensitive compared to your brain that's better able to tune out the outside environment. And beyond that, you got to always consider, what are you looking at? And I think this is a profound one. People are always looking at, especially on distortion, they're looking at this tiny bit on the bottom, right? They're looking at 0.1% distortion and under. So we're talking about, this is what you have. This is a 0 to 100% distortion, right? This is, there's everything that comes out is wrong, everything comes out is good, and we're looking down here. So it's like this tiny little bit on the bottom, and that's fine. That's not to say that that's bad, you shouldn't look at that. However, you need to take it into context. How much does it matter?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. When I did that distortion video with showing how the distortion measurements vary just by taking a head and putting it in a room versus putting it in our quiet measurement booth, it was wild. I mean, you had, and it was still, the environment itself was pretty quiet.
It was actually quiet.
Yeah, it was under 50 dB. I mean, it was really quiet. It was quiet enough to go to sleep.
That's the takeaway,
right?
In that room.
And it still affects the measurements.
Right.
Can you imagine in any normal environment?
That's still a room that people would consider quiet. If they walked in there, they'd be like, it's quiet in here, is what you would classically say. But to this is a very sensitive device. It hears it all, right? And even when you put it in a quieter booth, it still hears noise.
Yeah,
it always hears noise.
And it's thinking the noise is something wrong with the measurement.
It doesn't
not
know,
wrong, but it's reading it as a distortion, which it is because it is.
It's not the signal.
It's a signal that right. It's a different signal. So that, I hope that explains to people, at least and understand that and you see why a lot of people do run closed headphones, noise canceling when they're in an environment, because they don't want to hear that noise. They're trying to eliminate the noise, particularly on a place like an airplane or something like that, where it's a calmer experience, right? To not have jet engine drone noise coming in your ears for hours on end.
It helps modern planes are getting quieter.
They are better.
This is kind of one of those classical examples where it's easy to take the data out of context. Because in this situation, a lot of people will say, well, that means a closed headphone is better. Maybe. If you're in a very loud environment, absolutely. That's what they're made for, right? If you're in an average environment or a quiet environment, most likely an open headphone is going to perform better. Doesn't always mean it's the case. But generally speaking, when you're looking at the data and you're looking at distortion especially, when you're looking at that tiny little bit at the bottom, when you're looking at like under 0.1%, you're looking at 0.0 something percent, you're at the level where you're probably reading the environmental noise. So it's hard to say what matters.
You're not hearing that level of distortion.
And the profound thing here is not only do you probably not hear it, and you could test this for yourself. We could put a link in the video description about a distortion test you can do. It's pretty easy. I would encourage people to try it at home.
That's pretty cool.
But beyond that, you always need to consider how much it really matters, because if the distortion level is 0.02%, or that's what you're measuring, and you infer it's probably actually lower than that because of this, does it actually make a difference? Like, can you, maybe better is better, but when you're already at that level, it's like.
Well, I mean, I think that was the.
What difference does
I mean,
it make?
that video had a couple points when you look at, that distortion measurement increases with the noise around you increasing. It kind of makes sense. But, the other thing, meaning you could come out of that with, right, is that, like you're just getting at, does it really matter to have such low distortion when you're in an average room setting anyway? I mean, the room noise is greater distortion than the the
in
speaker.
this room we're in now, this environment, I hear the fan noise from the computer, a few other noises around here. The level of this noise, it's relatively quiet, but the level of this noise is somewhere in the range of like 100 times more than the distortion of a good high-end headphone.
Right.
So you have all this environmental noise. It's still quiet to you, right? This is the distortion of the headphone. So this, less is better, but like, are you noticing it? That's sort of the thing you always need to grasp that people always seem to miss. So looking at the number and looking at something that's like 0.000, great, but it at that point doesn't matter.
I mean, really, it's amazing how, a whole system could be, that low in distortion. I mean, because you're talking the amps and everything. Everything, and you're talking 0.00 whatever percent. That's pretty amazing.
It's negligible.
Some people say that. They say, look, it's below this certain level. It's not audible, whatever. But a lot of people always take the measurements out of context and say, oh, this is miles better because of this.
Well,
and technically, maybe. But then you also have the factor of, is it closed? How open is it? How accurate are the measurements?
Well, this stuff isn't really surprising. I mean, if you think about it, I've seen people optimize rooms and audio many times over, and video. And I mean, what's the first, like in video? That would be something that people could probably clue in really quick. What adds distortion when you're watching a video, a screen?
Well, all
outside
kinds
of
of
light.
things. Yeah,
Light.
Yeah.
Glare.
So rather than sound, it's light.
Yeah.
So in a perfect video room, right, you'd have to eliminate all forms of ambient
Has to
light.
be absolutely black.
Even an LED on the front of a panel, something,
it's too much.
can reflect off the screen and mess with you. Yeah. So, and I remember back in the day when I did trade shows with guys that did high-end projectors, they would go around with duct tape. You're in a booth on a floor in a convention center in Vegas, right? There's a lot of light in that place, right? So they're going around with duct tape trying to plug every possible crack in that room so it's pitch black, so it doesn't mess with showing you, right, the low-level detail that they can extract out of a video. And audio is the same thing. The guys in audio have been doing the same thing, where they want to be in a room that's quiet, not noisy, or in a room that's isolated from the rest of the house. So you're not hearing noises in the home because
underground.
It messes with you. Yeah, right.
That's actually a good way to put it.
It's the same kind of thing with headphones, except people don't seem to look at it that way.
Right. I think it's harder to understand. And I think we're doing a kind of a bad job at explaining it. But maybe all these words will help kind of people grasp what we're getting at. It's sort of a more visual example. You're in a really dark room, absolutely pitch black. You can't see anything. And assume you have a TV or something like that. Right, the distortion that you're measuring when you see these numbers are like 0.0 something percent, it's basically the equivalent of like the little LED on your phone charger cube on the other end of a big room. Yeah, it exists. Like you could see it if you look at it, kind of.
Yeah, it's over there somewhere.
Is it really causing any noticeable impact? If you unplug it, can you notice a difference in the picture?
Probably not.
Probably not. No, but with good equipment, with the best equipment, you could probably measure it. Probably.
Sure.
right?
It is a
But
source of light.
You're not going to notice it. So there's a trade-off there. At some point, it sort of doesn't matter.
Well, to say that too, let's say you had a camera in the room.
Yeah.
You know, a low light camera, which most of them are nowadays, right? And you point the camera at that corner of the room and it's pitch black.
Right.
Now you turn on this one little tiny little LED.
Right.
The camera's like focusing on it, because it's made to do that, right?
Right.
It's not. It doesn't care.
It's showing you information.
Yeah.
It's not giving you the context.
Right.
And the context in this situation, I think, is hyper critical.
So when you're in a noisy environment, that's the distortion. The headphone, the speakers are not changing how they play sound. You're being, the sound's being distorted by the noise around you.
Well, that's almost a wrong way to put it. It's your perfect sound is being added to the noise around you, right? So it's measured as distortion because it has no other way to show it to you. But it isn't true distortion in the fact that the sound isn't necessarily getting distorted. What hits your ears is being added to whatever's around you.
Which is why we have a quiet booth to make measurements in that drops our ambient about 25 dB below
a quiet room.
Yeah, I mean, in measuring it, the booth is at around 25 dB.
Right.
And the threshold of hearing is 20, I think, 20 dB, something like that.
Depends on the frequency.
You know, yeah. So you think about it.
You can still do better.
Okay, we could drop another 5 dB and then you can't hear it no matter what. You couldn't hear it.
Right. Like,
You know?
as an example, when we're measuring our headphones, especially Diana TC 1266 or whatever, you measure something like that and you're looking at the distortion graph. In our room, we're pretty much measuring the noise environment in the room. Like we really can't measure lower distortion than we're showing. Right. So that video that we put out on this, it wasn't like, spruced up or anything like that. That actually was a very conservative number we showed. It was already in a quiet room, and we were basically showing the level of distortion was sort of just measuring the noise in that room.
The distortion went up as we took the head out of the booth and put it in the room. And it's, and it just shows to go you that, that's what these devices do. They're made to measure tiny signals.
That's what they're made for.
Yeah. And
it's a tool.
They can't differentiate easily between.
Right.
When it comes to that type of measuring distortion, it doesn't know the difference. It just sees it as a sound that doesn't belong there, and ticks the box for more distortion. So anyway, it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's the way it is. There's no brain in the thing.
Well, I mean, these days though, we're spoiled though, because like everything's so good. Anybody that knows like 20, 30 years ago, like with your video analogy, like projectors and they were so dim that it was hypercritical, right?
Yeah, to get rid of all light, like excess light.
And now you just kind of brute force it and put 10,000 lumens on the screen.
Yeah, they made
you get a good experience with a window open.
Yeah, right.
I think the TV, camera, light thing's sort of a good example because you always got to consider the context. You could always make the number lower. And some of the important things here is the headphones that have more attenuation from outside in, that are more closed, they're going to look like they perform better on the distortion number.
In a noisy, when it's measured in a noisy
because
room.
You're almost always in a noisy environment.
We should probably expand on
relative
that.
To this.
If you take this test, you take our test set, okay, and you take a closed back headphone and put on a test set, it's going to inherently it's in a room. It's not in a proper noise enclosure. It's not in an enclosure that drops noise. It's out in the open like this, right? And you take an open back headphone and you measure it, and you take a closed back headphone and measure it. It could be the exact same speakers in both.
It could perform identical.
Right? Yeah. You will get a higher distortion measurement on the open back, not because the headphone's distorting, but because it's the test head's hearing the room and thinking that's distortion. So it's the same headphone, right? Just one's got no openings and the other one does.
Well, the important thing is they could both literally perform exactly the same, but the closed back would show a better looking graph because it's not showing the outside noise. And even when you're in a quieter room, this is the case. You need to be in a room that's 0 dB. It needs to be absolutely no noise for you to not measure the difference.
But the confusion is people think then people are going to say, well, that means I should be getting a closed back because they're lower distortion. It's like, no, neither headphone is distorting. It's the noise around you.
Well, this is where the nuance
comes in,
that your brain's
hearing.
Yeah. So to some extent, I guess you could say a closed back is better for that. However, if you go back to the context situation, you got to consider below a certain threshold that's honestly pretty high. It could be as high as 1% in some environments and situations. Below 1% or 0.5%, you cannot hear the difference anyways. So what does it matter, That's sort of the thing to consider.
I mean, you could train yourself to hear some of this stuff.
People should go do the little test we put in the description of this video. Maybe we'll pin a comment or something.
Yeah.
There's a tracks you play back and the distortion increases.
Yeah.
And you could click when you hear the distortion.
You got to try to be honest when you do it.
You got to try to be honest. It's very hard
It's easy to
do.
fool yourself.
Yeah.
Do it over and over again. Wait a few days, do it again.
Yeah, you don't want to be Superman in it. You really want to be like judge it for when you really
Well, that's
think
the
you
whole
hear it.
time you're thinking, I know what's going up.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Clearly
bias
there's
there.
a
It could
problem.
fool you, but
Yeah.
it's a good test. You can try
So
it.
the sooner I hit it, it
It is a cool test.
Right.
So we'll give it to you. I think it's a video you can watch, right? And you could decide at
something
what
like that.
point you hear distortion. So it's pretty
Right.
cool. And on that note, we'll let everyone go. Thumbs us up, please, if you like this video. Subscribe, and we'll see you later. Take care, everyone.